Thank you very much, Vuyo, and I think our condolences to all viewers. It's a pain we all share today.
Take us back to that moment last night when you first heard that Madiba was no more.
I think that we had a sense, there was a sense for the past few days that it was slipping. And I got an SMS last night to confirm that in fact it had happened and the President would be making an announcement. And it's difficult, you know. I think that we'd seen Tata slip over the last while. And we knew of the pain and we knew how difficult this has been for the family. But still, it's very hard. It's very hard to kind of take leave in this kind of way, in spite of the way, in true Madiba style, the world had been prepared for a moment like this. He'd been gracious even in that kind of separation. But, you know, there's a kind of finality to it, which I think is almost inevitable.
I want to take you back to your UDF days. Looking at Mandela, singing about Mandela, reading about him, hearing about him from other people who came into contact with him. What image of Mandela did you have? And did that image, did you get a different image when ultimately you were in the same physical space with him?
You know, the first real contact was actually via Ahmed Katrada. I was held under Section 29 in Portsmouth Prison, and Madiba was still there. Kathy was sneaked to the grill of my cell. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know who this old man was or what he wanted and why he was asking me to keep quiet. And then he told me that all of them, and named each of them, were sending me a message of strength. And then he disappeared, and the following day I received a poem on a card, because prisons are places where things get smuggled. So a card was smuggled to me with a poem, Say Not the Struggle Naught Availeth. It's a very beautiful poem. And there was a contact, though not physical. And then after Madiba was moved to the house at Victor Verster, I was one of the leadership corps of the UDF who were taken to meet him there. He knew the moment I walked in, he knew me, he knew the name of my wife, he knew the name of my children. There was warmth there. There was no distance. He'd done his homework.
Apart from the warmth, what was it about him that struck you, that particularly struck you as soon as you walked into that room?
Look, there's always been a resoluteness, strength, the ability to see the next move. In fact, that visit was a few days before his release. And that needs to be played out. And, you know, the clerk's office called us early in the morning of the 10th of February 1990. Dala Omar, Sakimat Kozama, Bulelani Nguka were all in Cape Town. And we were asked to come to what was then HF building, now 120 Plain Street. The office of General Willemse, who was head of prisons, and the general told us that President de Klerk was convening a press conference telling the world that Nelson Mandela would be released the following day and that he would be released into our care. He was kind enough to let us go through to Victor Verster to see Madiba. We had to first... Beforehand, we had to first convene activists so that we could organize the reception. We went through and we saw him. Madiba was in his pajamas, cool, relaxed. He'd been formally told that morning that he'd been released. And now it was talk of the preparation for release. Completely relaxed, in control of the situation. And throughout all of the interaction, it was that ability to see the next step that always distinguished what Madiba was. We were back there the following day with the family. I recall Cyril Ramaphosa, when we told him he was in hospital in Johannesburg with pneumonia, he was chairing the reception committee. He didn't wait for the doctor. He removed the drips himself
Got off and left.
Got off and left and came along. Then, you know, the discussions with the family who wanted him in Johannesburg. Madiba was resolute. He wanted to thank the people of Cape Town.
Did it make your life any easy or difficult, given that he was going to be released into your care and you were going to be responsible for this giant?
Well, it's like today, nothing prepares you for it. Now we've got cell phones, we've got computers. Then we had nothing. We had no two-way radios, no phones. We were just out there battling to organize something. No power of the state. But every step of the way, you know, in fact, the day of his release, he was lost in the crowd. And for more than an hour, we couldn't find him. It's one of those strange stories. But when he came to speak, he realized he didn't have his specs. And he borrowed Masisulu's specs to deliver that speech. But there was, you know, in the discussions in the House before we left, he knew what he wanted in the speech. He wanted to say on that day that President de Klerk is a man of integrity. And we, the young militants, thought,
you can't say that.
You can't say that. And Madiba was very clear about why he needed to say that and that he would. Nothing was going to stop him. And I think in many ways that characterized the way in which he interacted. I was privileged to be part of that delegation that accompanied him on his first trip abroad. We went to Lusaka, where every African head of state met, the NEC of the ANC. We went to Harare. We went through Tanzania. I wasn't part of the small delegation that went to Addis with him for the OAU meeting, and then on to Stockholm for the unity between Mandela and Tambo that happened there.
What was the reception like? It would be different today, obviously, but was the reception he got from other heads of state then different from the respect he continued to get long after he became president?
No. Bear in mind that as the ANC were very dependent on the frontline states, on the OAU, and through that on the UN Committee Against Apartheid, because this was the central pillar of organizing governments against the apartheid regime. Of course, there was a big anti-apartheid movement as well, which was non-governmental, but the heads of state were fundamentally important. And KK, Kenneth Kaunda, was a father to the ANC. You know, it wasn't just serving heads of state, because you also had people like Mwalimu, Julius Nyerere, who was fundamentally important in mobilizing support for the ANC, in holding a very strong position. He was out of office already, but fundamentally important at that time.
Now, over the next few days, Minister, this nation is going to be in conversation about Nelson Mandela's legacy. What for you would be Nelson Mandela's legacy? Or what should we concentrate on, perhaps, as a nation, as we continue to pay homage to him over the next few days?
I think, firstly, it's the greatness of his spirit. It's a person who always put everybody else before himself. Secondly, a strategist who saw what needed to be done. Nelson Mandela was a non-racialist and a non-sexist in the best sense of the word. He would sometimes overlook people very close to him simply because he needed to affirm others. He was great in that, and that always provided a signal. He was caring in the way in which he approached people about their concerns. He was always the first on the phone if a family or a community was struck by some kind of tragedy. And all of this was deeply genuine. It's what shaped him and what endeared people to him, but it also empowered others to be able to become their best, because there was always somebody out there, greater, smarter, more determined, and the least that the rest could do was to try and emulate that greatness of spirit.
Minister, very briefly, and the last point from me. Non-racialism was something Madiba felt very strongly about. A few years ago, I remember a couple of your speeches where you were raising this issue about whether the ANC has gone back to those fundamental values that it stood for. In honor of Madiba, the duty to promote a country that's non-racial, where everyone enjoys freedom, but also equality?
It's a fundamentally important choice. It's one of our constitutional, in fact, one of the founding provisions. Non-racialism and non-sexism sit together in the founding provisions of our Constitution. It needs to be read together with Clause 9 of the Bill of Rights, which sets out equality provisions. It says that we must take such measures to advance the interests of people who've been previously disadvantaged. It's getting the balance right. We must be able to talk about it, but understand that we're a complex nation with 11 different languages, all entrenched in our Constitution, and we must create space and opportunity for everybody. That's a spirit that we need to emulate in the life of our giant who has now passed.
Minister Manuel, thank you very much for sharing your insights as we pay homage to Madiba this morning.